So today I wanted to talk about letting go. Um, this is kind of a continuation of the series that I've been doing. And, interestingly enough, as as sometimes happens in my little Zen calendar, no, this was the quote from Tricycle today. And it's from Jane Hirschfield, who was a student of Suzuki Roshi and is a poet. And this is what she said. The middle way means living in accord with things as they are, with ourselves as we are. And does that sound like it has something to do with letting go? Because it really does. But we use this term, letting go, very frequently in Zen speak, as if we all know what it is and how to do it. And I wonder if there's an actual Pali word for it. Maybe somebody knows this. And if the Buddha used that word when he spoke in his own language, which was not Pali, because Pali was recorded as a written language, and no recordings were made until several hundred years after the Buddha's death. But it's certainly not a concept that I grew up with. And I don't think there's much precedent for it in our cultural and intellectual history. It's the phrase we use to express how to work with the understanding that that's expressed by the second noble truth. And it's the idea, of course, that the cause of suffering is a kind of emotional clinging to things, a clutching at what we want, a, a pushing away of what we don't want. And in doing so, we fantasize that those behaviors will relieve our pain, but they only make it worse. And the grabbing and pushing away and fantasizing, that's greed, hate, and delusion, of course. There's a famous story about letting go, and I'll read it to you. Two traveling monks reached a river where they met a young woman. Wary of the current, she asked if they could carry her across. One of the monks hesitated, but the other quickly picked her up onto his shoulders, transported her across the water, and put her down on the other bank. She thanked him and departed. As the monks continued on their way, the one was brooding and preoccupied. Unable to hold his silence, he spoke out. Brother, our spiritual training teaches us to avoid any contact with women, but you picked that one up on your shoulders and carried her. Brother, the second monk replied, I set her down on the other side while you are still carrying her. There are lots of things to unpack about this story, but first I just want to mention what I see as its kind of admonitory quality. It kind of says you should let go. And I think this is one of the problems that we as Westerners have with being able to let go. We tend to think of it as a virtue and not letting go as a vice. Our whole intellectual tradition is built on this kind of dualism. Either or, never both and never a third option or even more than that. Our religious traditions speak of good and evil, dark and light, sin and grace, vice and virtue, impure and pure, sinner and saint, heaven and hell, good and bad, guilty and or innocent. And I'm sure you can think of more dualisms like that. It's thought, excuse me, neurobiologically, that this tendency to judge and discriminate is a fundamental act at a neurological level in response to any stimulation. We immediately, subconsciously judge a sensation as good or bad, safe or unsafe, and we accept or reject, stay or go on the basis of this neurological adjudication. We carry this discriminatory capacity forward into every activity and experience, wanting more of what gives us pleasure, safety, and comfort, and shunning, avoiding, and protecting ourselves against what is painful or threatening. In our Western traditions, we've made this our way of life, and our religious traditions support and justify it. But the Buddha taught something different, the middle way between opposites. Letting go is not an injunction against discrimination, actually. It has much more to do with attention and acceptance than with getting rid of clinging. People gonna cling. After all, clinging is part of existence itself. We have to cling to exist and to survive. We have to cling to life. It's built in biologically. And it's one of the 12 links of dependent origination. You take out one link and it all goes away. The Buddha's point is not to get rid of clinging, but to wake up and to see ourselves and how we perpetuate this tendency when it's not helpful. Pay attention and notice and care for. Trying to see what's going on and accepting it as reality. You're probably familiar with the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. That's it, wisdom to know the difference. I think that to have this kind of equanimity is to be willing to turn towards the reality of our lives and to accept it. Not necessarily to like it, but to see it and be willing to abide with it. Not never changing things, but knowing when it's fruitful to do so. My teacher Grace used to encapsulate the second noble truth in the term Witbo, W-I-T-B-O-W, wishing it to be otherwise. Witbo, wanting, craving, demanding that something be different in order to relieve my suffering or protect me from that circumstance. But then we see ourselves doing Witbo. We see ourselves wanting it to be otherwise, wanting the circumstances to be otherwise, and then we tend to judge ourselves for our Witbo and say to ourselves, I know I shouldn't be feeling this way, etc., etc. But I don't think that's the Buddha's point at all either. I don't think he means don't feel. I don't think he means don't long for, don't grieve, don't experience anger or frustration or fear. I think he means turn toward your life and experience it fully, attend to yourself and life, and then see what to do to serve it. Something like that. So it's not so much doing without clinging. It's not so much doing it's not so much doing without clinging as seeing ourselves clinging. Always in Dogen's backward step. Stepping back and then deciding how to engage with whatever the circumstances are. Now, this is not easy in many at all. Letting go of a strongly held habit or desire is difficult. That is, the force of habit and clinging is so strong, it will put up a fight. In a sense, it feels like it's fighting for its existence almost. And it feels like climbing a steep hill. But when you get to the top, there's freedom and exhilaration. When I was writing this, I thought about a time that I got a new car. I'd always driven Volvos, but my husband talked me into buying a small Acura SUV. This was early in our relationship, and he's a Honda guy, so I did it. But I was very, very anxious about it, and because I liked and trusted Volvos, And also, choosing my own car was an important symbol of my independence. And I fretted about this up until the point of driving away in my new car. And 5 minutes later, I was a convert and had forgotten all about my need for Volvos forever. So it was like climbing a steep hill, and then right on the top of the hill, I could actually breathe. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't buy a Volvo or anything like that, but it's this experience of how hard it is to find that place of willingness to let go. But at the moment of letting go, it's the easiest thing in the world. And when you let go, there's freedom and new possibility. And you drop having to have things your way, and you open to more. Now, in our practice of meditation, we practice letting go by learning to shift our attention from our thinking to our breath. We train our minds to be able to move our attention freely. This is the most basic backward step. Stepping back mentally to see what the mind is doing. Picking and choosing and telling stories mostly. That stepping back is noticing ourselves doing that, and then noticing the noticing. You have to see what you're doing before you can let go of it. When the first exposure that I had to a meditation tradition was the Shambhala tradition, and I went to a retreat with Pema Chodron, and we were taught to notice thinking and then to label it thinking, and then turn your attention back to your breath. And I think this technique can be very useful. But the point is the turning of attention. Turning your attention to your breath is the act of letting go. It is an act of letting go of the thinking mind. And it's a training in mental flexibility. It doesn't mean that all circumstances call for turning your attention to your breath. When you're driving a car, you need to have your attention on the road. But it means that you begin to learn a certain mental flexibility that has been hidebound by habit prior to that. It means that all circumstances call for attention, the kind of attention that we practice in meditation. They call for attention, flexibility, and agility, which is why we practice, to determine how to act in order to care for ourselves and others. Now, since most of us have come to meditative practice after our habits of clinging and rejecting have been fully formed, not only is sitting quietly and noticing thoughts, emotions, and sensations, and turning our attention to our breath hard, but letting go of must-haves and get away from me is really challenging and even sometimes frightening, which is why we call it jumping off the 100-foot pole. And these kinds of things, they're very small, especially in those of us who are, as we say, set in our ways. They can be very, very small, but they're like addictions. They are addictions, and some are very big, but some are small. And I think it's good to start working with the small ones to build some trust in the practice. Maybe it's just a quirk. You think of it just as a quirk, like how you think the table should be set, with the spoon and knife on the right and the knife facing the plate, and the fork on the left on top of the napkin. And maybe your partner does it just the opposite, or haphazardly. Or they just jumble up the utensils in the drawer instead of organizing them by category. Or the grocery clerk who gives you the bills and change with some of them upside down or turned over. I mean, I hate that. And I grumble, and I turn those bills right side up and in order so I put them in my wallet. So these kinds of things are really good for practicing uh, changing attention. So what if I just take a breath and sit down and have a nice meal together? What if I just put my bills in the wallet just as they are? And how does that feel? And can I tolerate the discomfort? The feeling that the order of the universe has been tweaked by higgledy-piggledy currency. Can I just notice my discomfort and my attachment to Whitbo? And perhaps my grief at my Whitbo not being met? Caring about myself enough to abide with myself and then go on. Accepting both the circumstances and myself. Both and, not either or. And that's the middle way. So back to Jane Hirschfield. The middle way means living in accord with things as they are and with ourselves as we are. Thank you very much. Now let's take about 2 minutes to reflect.